Good evening, YouTube followers. So glad to be back with you after about a few months. I've been working on my third book, planning the release, and I'm glad to be back with you on this morning of Sunday, December 3rd, 2023. This is my 37th YouTube Live. A lot to talk about, a lot to catch up over the past 2 months since I've been working on the book release of my third book. I want to talk about several things in this YouTube Live. I finished Jubilee since my previous YouTube live video, an amazing novel by an amazing writer, PhD graduate, librettist, and biographer, Margaret Walker. Um, the way that she characterizes the end of her novel, I think, is very important. The main character is Viry, who is based on Margaret Walker's real life great grandmother. And shout out to Ebony Lubumba on being able to produce an awesome conference at Jackson State University, where Dr. Margaret Walker taught for decades. If you haven't read this novel, I would recommend reading it, especially for those. As a Black woman novelist, Walker is really dealing, I find her work very preoccupied with the development of the male in this country. That's what I felt was the most prevailing part of the second half. After the Civil War has destroyed the way of life she was grown into, the slave plantation way of life, life's not easy for Viry and the man who would become her husband. She was waiting for a long time for the father of her first two children, Randall Ware, to show up. He had left just before the war, and she couldn't wait. But the way she characterizes Viry's son, the oldest son, and how he was starting to grow into his manhood and develop a difference of opinion with Ennis, who becomes Viry's second child's father, second husband, if you will, was just amazing because Ennis is a hard field worker, and he was training Viry's oldest son to be the same. But Viry's oldest son had a longer, farther vision of his own life. He did not want to be a sharecropper. He did not want to be a worker. So a big conflict ensues in the second half of the novel when Ennis accuses um, the oldest son, Viry's son, of being neglectful with the pig, letting the pig die. And a huge battle ensues. But later, Randall the blacksmith comes back, who is her oldest son's biological father. And just the conflict that Walker shows between Ennis, who is a God fearing sharecropper, and Randall Ware, who's a self taught blacksmith, but who you could tell has really been like never had a stable employment or home, was harassed by the clan. Even though he's very educated, he is so educated, he has no spiritual grounding. And so there's a beautiful line in there where Viry basically she treats him off. She read him, she reads Viry reads Randall, and it was worth it. It was worth reading 300 to 400 pages to get to that conflict, powerful novel. I highly recommend Jubilee you read. I finished it in October. Started a book group. Very interesting book. I'm halfway over this one. By the way, if you just joined, please subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. Subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. Comments are welcome. Comment on my YouTube. Also, uh, don't hesitate to tell other people about it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you've learned anything and want to bless my Cash App donations are more than welcome. My Cash App is my name, $ my name, Roan Fraser. I'm reading this incredible book now. It's called The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace. It is written by Jeff Hobbs, who was a year behind me at Yale College. And reading this book, I'm reading it in Calvin Michaels' YouTube book group. Calvin Michaels is an amazing blogger. And I'm glad that he chose this one because I'm among a spirited group of very active readers, very active book readers, and it's a lot. It's a lot because Jeff Hobbs is bringing me back to when I went to college at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. All the landmarks, all the streets, um, College Avenue, Toad's Place. He's mentioning, and but he's writing about his classmates, Robert Peace, who I remember conversing with at least twice when I was at Yale, from 97 to '01. Robert and Jeff got there in 98. They were the class of '02. I was class of '01. And what's fascinating and deep about this book, like the brilliant Reverend at Lenox Road Baptist who gave the eulogy for my uncle, Sharon Downer, said, the Bible is a book that reads your life. In an interesting way, Jeff Hobbs' book is also reading my life. It's reminding me of where I came from in terms of my college years, because Robert Peace was just one class behind me, and I remember him very distinctly. And it was a lot of similarities. It's a lot of similarities between his life, Robert Peace's life that Jeff Hobbs is writing about, and my life. Namely, both Robert and I were MB&B majors. And when you said that among your colleagues, they were like, because MB&B stands for molecular biophysics and biochemistry. Before I just delved into the humanities and stayed in the humanities, I was a biochemistry major. But the closest, they didn't have a biochemistry major. You had to be a molecular biophysics and biochemistry major. And so Jeff Hobbs describes the journey of his classmate, Robert Peace, being born in Newark, New Jersey, um, fighting, fighting to have his place, hardworking, loving knowledge. Jeff Hobbs reveals so many interesting things about Robert Peace's life. I'm wondering how Jeff, knows so much. That was one of the big questions while I'm reading Jeff Hobbs' books. Like, how do you know this? Like, how do you know all these details? But he makes clear at the very end in the acknowledgement section how Jeff, knew so much by interviewing everybody around Robert. Because I do remember when he passed suddenly in 2011, and he died where he was born in Newark. But I remember him and how Jeff describes him as a very inquisitive man who formed deep relationships with his friends and family. Yeah, so this is a very compelling read. It's a personal read for me because I am a little critical of Jeff's frame. I'm appreciative that he's documenting for all of us to know who Robert Peace was. Without this book, we may not have never known the value of his life. But certain things I appreciate Jeff doing, other things I question. One of the things I appreciate Jeff doing is telling us, the reader, about Robert's dad and how Robert's dad, like me, loved biography, loved discussing people's life, and loved book reading, conversation that always was enriched by book reading, with and supplemented with book reading, particularly biographies of prominent people. And that's how Jeff describes Robert's dad. Like Robert, he's inquisitive. Like Robert, he thrives off of new information. And it's not just about knowledge, it's about wisdom, which is the application, proper application of knowledge. We're in the season of Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. And as far as I've seen, the virtue absolutely of Sagittarius is wisdom, which is the proper application of knowledge. And it's just a fascinating book to me because the way that Jeff looks at Robert, I would not have looked at it, but then I'm not motivated like Jeff to just delve and research and write so much detail about his college classmate. It's very fascinating. One of the pages I wanted to take a look at really for me reflected Jeff Hobbs's frame. And let me see if I can pull it up. This is on page 152. This is after Jeff is describing um, Robert leaving Newark and now living on campus in New Haven, Connecticut. He says, I thought the story ended there, but Rob kept going. He's talking at this point about Rob's anger because he worked in the cafeteria, in the dining hall, rather. They call them dining halls in the residential college. Hi, sweetie. I see my baby here. My fur baby here is right at my knees. This is the part in Jeff's book where he's talking about Rob being frustrated with the way that the students disregarded, did not bust their trays after they ate their meals, and how, Rob was very quick to criticize and bring to attention and call to the Yale students' attention, hey, bust your tray. Nobody's here to pick up or clean up after you. So in this part, Jeff Hobbs writes, protracting these events into the future, Rob's desire to find the guys, get them off campus, and carry out retribution away from the faculty overseers, emergency phones, and campus police who maintain the pervading atmosphere of complete safety, even invincibility. Though he didn't um, so to words, let me just see if I could expand this. I'm gonna try and expand it so I could read this better. If not, I'm gonna just do my best. Um, no, I'm gonna cancel that layout. Um, Let me see if I could zoom in. There's a decent full screen layout, or I have the version here. Let me see. Yeah, I'm gonna get proper reading of this. This is on 152, so I just want to make sure I can read this more clearly. Jeff Hobbs writes, though he didn't say so in words, Rob, seemed intent on proving. Let me see this. Make sure I get my view. Uh-oh. Bear with me. Here we go. Jeff Hobbs is saying about Robert Peace. He didn't say so in words. Rob, seemed intent on proving to himself and to them that no one was invincible, that Yaley or not, anyone could and should be held to account for the kind of person he was. And I notice I circled that part. Um, Not cleaning up after themselves, because that was Robert's issue with certain students who would not clean up after themselves in the dining hall. And so you can't do that, Jeff is telling Rob, I said. And he looked at me chagrined, his face saying, why the hell not? My answer, I mean, you just can't. I know, he finally said. What, you thought I was serious? In fact, I had known he was. And then I want to skip down to the paragraph that really contains Jeff Hobbs's frame. It's an important thing to notice because I'm grateful that he's doing it, but I'm also aware of Jeff Hobbs's frame. Jeff Hobbs writes, Rob Peace, shook his head and smiled for the first time that night, a smile approaching the broad, remarkable grin that had come to characterize him on campus. He knew I could never understand. Jeff, could never understand. And he was kind enough not to hold my sheltered obliviousness against me. And he's talking about somebody with some sort of class privilege. And then this next sentence I chose to underline because it, more than any other part in the whole novel, shows Jeff Hobbs's frame. Jeff Hobbs writes, this had become the rhythm of our friendship at Yale. Jeff Hobbs' friendship with Robert Peace. He would share with me the smallest fragment of his world and then step back into the whole of mine. And I was just so fascinated by that line because he knows the Yale world is more or less the world of people from the class and culture of Jeff's, not Robert's. So that's what made this a compelling read. I highly recommend it. It's called The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace. I wouldn't frame it in such tragic terms. I would rename the title to be The Deliberate Life of Robert Peace because his life wasn't short and his life is not tragic to me. He lived a very deliberate life, studying what he wanted to study, supporting the people who he needed to support. So shout out to Robert Peace's life. Shout out to Jeff Hobbs for all the research and hard work he put into writing that novel. A book I'm reading right now is I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It. I chose to read it after seeing, just cancel culture. I wrote a book review earlier this year that was making the case for cancel culture. And right as I was writing it, I heard Jason Lee's interviews of Babyface, with Babyface saying cancel culture kills artists. It just kills artists. So I became very passionate about analyzing cancel culture and why it is more detrimental and not helpful. And Norman Finkelstein has a whole chapter about the danger of cancel culture. Um, Part one, he has two parts of this book. The second part is academic freedom. And Norman Finkelstein has been a staunch advocate. He has a whole book called The Holocaust Industry about how the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust of Jews in Germany is overblown and people make money telling lies and telling obfuscations about the whole Nazi Holocaust. So I find his work very important, and I find his analysis of identity politics, certain parts true, particularly what he has in the fourth chapter. I was most struck because I'm halfway through Finkelstein's book right now. In his fourth chapter, he's talking about a former graduate school classmate of mine, Ibram Kendi. And he's taking his ideas, Kendi's ideas, face value, and just putting Kendi's ideas in the context of Kendi's class position. Like I was mentioning earlier about Jeff Hobbs's class, social class compared to Robert Peace's social class. And Finkelstein is doing a similar thing, but he's much more critical of and showing what Finkelstein thinks is the hypocrisy of Kendi's positioning regarding what he's been given. I just want to start with this sentence. How, incidentally, could the MacArthur Foundation's white officers bestow upon Kendi a genius award if they were constitutionally incapable of grasping his putative genius? It confounds why he would reveal that he won the Alabaster White National Book Award and that he is published in the white deep structure journals such as The Atlantic and the New York Times, Finkelstein writes. Forgive the heretical thought, but one, and this is the part I underline, one gets the distinct impression that this ferocious anti-assimilationist, talking about Kendi, reckons white culture to be superior, Finkelstein writes. And didn't he, per many an enterprising assimilationist, bid adieu to the needs nearly everything that he is and that is intrinsic to his being when he, Kendi, left behind his black space, black bodies, black thoughts, black cultures, black histories, black neighborhood, and headed off for white space, bodies, thoughts? And this is also relevant to where Robert Peace is leaving Newark, a black space for a white space, a space that Jeff Hobbs calls his in his book. Why then, Finkelstein writes, didn't this exemplary anti-racist locate his anti-racist research center funded to the tune of $10 million by then Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey at Florida A&M University? Why, Finkelstein is asking, couldn't Kendi operate an anti-racist center at Florida A&M or another of the historically black colleges and universities? It's just an interesting analysis of his work because, as was written in the Black Agenda report of Kendi's work, it seems to be an overemphasis on race. Race plays a valuable role, but from what I've read of Kendi's work, it's highly overblown. Like race explains everything. That's what I'm getting from Kendi's work. And in my mind, it's like, no, race doesn't explain everything. Stand from the beginning seems to be an overemphasis on race, as if it's the only factor that determines historical events. And similar to the 1619 Project, which I've written about, it just overemphasizes and does not leave any room in the 1619 Project, nor do I see in Kendi's work a serious analysis and a serious placing of class in the context of what he's writing. I don't see things being put in a class context. And Finkelstein speaks to that here. I saw on November 23rd the amazing film Rustin. Politically, and in a lot of ways, I do not agree with Bayard Rustin. Real Black posted the WBAI interview of the WBAI debate between Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin, which I found very interesting. And I learned a lot. I still sided with Malcolm in that debate because, uh, in terms of US policy to Africa, Rustin was totally uncritical and totally saw no problem with the ways in which the United States supported puppet leadership. Rustin had nothing to say about the oppressive ways that Western interests have exploited Africa. He had no problem with it. But in that debate, in that 1960 debate, which you can see at the Real Black YouTube channel, you can hear that whole debate. Uh, Malcolm X rightfully criticized. But I think what I like about this film, and shout out to Dustin Black and to Julian Brees. I tweeted on my X account several interviews Justin Brees gave about the screenplay. What really appealed to me, what impressed me about Julian Brees' screenplay was that he included and he chose to begin Rustin's life in the year 1960, between 1960 and 1963. And I thought that was a wise choice because how are you going to show, what part do you show of a man who had a large life? And I thought Justin Brees's choice to just focus on 1960 to 1963 was very wise. I liked the way the screenplay included what Rustin did in Pasadena. It was taboo, but the viewer could definitely infer something sexual happened. And the way that the character, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., brilliantly played by the amazing thespian stage actor Jeffrey Wright. Shout out to Jeffrey Wright on that powerful portrayal of Adam Clayton Powell. But the way that the screenplay showed that, similar to J. Edgar Hoover, but just by a Black person, Adam Clayton Powell was trying to, and he succeeded in driving a wedge between Bayard Rustin, who was very excited about guiding Martin Luther King Jr. into the leadership position since the successful Montgomery bus boycott. The screenplay shows that. The screenplay shows Rustin's role in really pushing King to the forefront. And but it also shows how Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was trying to use the specter of Pasadena, quote unquote, Pasadena, as a way to get King to separate himself from Rustin, which he succeeded in doing. So when I saw that part, I was immediately sympathetic to Rustin because I know what it feels like in the workplace to be made to feel bad just for who you are. I'm very familiar with that. So shout out to Justin Brees. I also liked in the screenplay Rustin's inability to allow true love in his life. Um, and you see that just he would go off on tangents that would be self-sabotaging. Rustin in the screenplay, and it's like, oh, why would you do that? He would say certain things that immediately in my mind was like, oh, that's a red flag. Oh, you're trying to sabotage this. So because he did that, Rustin, this the character Rustin was very sympathetic. Shout out to Coleman Domingo on an amazing job in performing uh, Bayard Rustin. It made me really go back to John D'Amelio's biography of Bayard Rustin, and I wanted to read two parts because there was a particular part the um, of the biography by John D'Amelio. This is from the biography Lost Prophet that I thought Justin Brees's screenplay beautifully shown. John D'Amelio writes, for staff, Rustin turned to many of the young men and women whom he had mentored. Tom Kahn served as his personal assistant. making the phone calls, setting up meetings, drafting his correspondence, and reminding him each day of the details that needed to be done. I want to make sure I read the parts clearly because some of the words on what I have here are so small and I'm trying to blow it up. Okay, so this is the middle of the second paragraph of John D'Amelio's biography. Um, he made Norman Hill, who served as his core, Congress of Racial Equality, lent to the venture. And the film shows how Rustin had a whole past of organizing well before 1960 when he worked for the Fellowship of Reconciliation, when he was a freedom rider, when he got beat up on the bus. There's that dramatic scene in this film when he's assaulted by the police officer because of his freedom rider work. So Brees did an amazing job to show how he sacrificed the sacrifice Rustin made to make the March on Washington a success, and he succeeded in making it a success. Um, and then on this particular page 340, D'Amelio describes the physical place that Brees's screenplay included, that office located in Harlem on West 130th Street, was donated by Thomas Kilgore, the activist pastor of the Friendship Baptist Church, who would often work with Rustin on joint projects. Now the church building was active as a beehive. This is the part of the screenplay. This is the part of the biography that the screenplay showed beautifully. The beehive, but also the ringing phones with people asking about Pasadena. And that was the most dramatic part of the whole film when he ordered the staff, do not answer the phone because it's going to be a distraction and it's going to create a morale among the organizers that Rustin was in charge of, a kind of morale that would damper. So I really felt that. Shout out to Julian Brees for helping me feel the shame, but the determination when he put Coleman Domingo's Bayard Rustin put his finger on the phone to stop it from ringing. Dramatic part, amazing. Congratulations on to Julian Brees on an awesome screenplay. I also heard the refrain "I have a wife" from, and then the sexual scenes, they were so suggested you barely knew if it was real or if it was imagined, and I like that a lot because it left so much more to the imagination. Um, yeah, I do wanna. If when I was a little boy, my dad would take me to the movies, and we would read the movie reviews before we would go. And if it was like 2 stars, we wouldn't go. The film would have to get 3 stars in the newspaper for my dad to want to take us. So on a scale of 5 stars, I give Rustin a 4 out of 5, only because um, politically, to me, he's not somebody who is completely sacrificing. He sacrificed a lot to make the march happen, but his disagreement with Fannie Lou Hamer, which the film didn't get into and didn't have to, really turned me off because he told Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to take that awful compromise that they did not take, which I'm so glad that Johnson offered, only 2 seats instead of seating all of them the way they should have been seated at that 64 Democratic National Convention. But Bayard Rustin opened an amazing door when he organized successfully that whole march. That march opened the door. It showed the coalition between the NAACP and the federal government, the possibility that the federal government can, in fact, acknowledge these radical groups, can, in fact, acknowledge the need for change. Um, since last being on my YouTube live, I went to Jamaica for the 5th time for my Aunt Annie's funeral. Aunt Annie was very important to me. Aunt Annie helped raise me. Aunt Annie make black cake for me. High school graduation. Aunt Annie demonstrate business ownership when she owned a restaurant in Belglade. So praise God for Aunt Annie. I love you. Thank you for showing me so much love in my life. And then finally, I want to say before I finish this YouTube live, my 4th book is coming out in February. I'm very glad to have had the help and the sponsorship of so many people, Ed and Sherry Henley, novelist Marlon James, my great aunt Carmen Francis, Russell Maroon Schultz, Ayanna Gregory, Michael Bailey, Calvin Michaels. I don't believe I missed anybody. Duyani Barlatier, thank you, who gave to support the printing of this third book. I'm very proud of it. It is my third baby. It's scheduled to come out. We're having a book reading in February at Penn State, and the book is this is the first book to critically engage the scholarship of the most prolific historian of the journalist Marcus Garvey, and that is Dr. Tony Martin. That's his face in the middle, flanked all around by the books he edited or wrote as part of his Marcus Garvey library. My new book, To a More Positive Purpose, includes a survey of all of Tony Martin's works, as well as 8 critical essays that look at Martin's historical, literary, and linguistics aspects of the Garvey movement. So I'm very excited. I look forward to that book being released and it being discussed. Thank you for joining me on my 37th YouTube Live. Please like, share, and subscribe. Support my Cash App $, Roan Fraser. Please keep writing, keep reading, and keep the faith.